But friends, the US is losing the war of attrition against Iran. We're a month into this war, and none of the stated objectives have been accomplished, while so many high-end US weapons are running critically low on ammunition. This is what we call terrible planning. Years worth of inventory were burned through in days. I mean, look at that, 11 interceptors were launched to stop this one Iranian ballistic missile, and none of them were able to hit their target. Here in Qatar, it's 4 interceptors that failed to stop a ballistic missile. Exact same situation in Dubai, where 4 Patriot missiles completely missed their target.
We are winning!
It seems the Gulf countries literally applied the doctrines of military genius, Sun Tzu. Just tell everyone you have tremendous amounts of ammunition. Now so many American weapon systems deployed in the Middle East have exhausted all their ammunition. All the markers are in red with the risk of total depletion within weeks, such as for the very important Tomahawk cruise missiles, but also Patriot and THAAD air defense interceptors. How come the US, with a mighty military budget exceeding $1 trillion, is now telling the entire world that they're running out of ammunition? After a month of war, the US and its allies launched 5,900 interceptors to counter 5,500 Iranian drones and missiles. This rate of attrition is simply not sustainable. And guess what? Now the Houthis entered the dance as well. I'm sure the US has it all figured out, right? Right? Let's be real, US military planners expected a repeat of the 2025 12 Days War. A swift and decisive aerial campaign relying on overwhelming technological superiority. But this time, the blitzkrieg failed. The Iranians took the punches, and now that their adversary is showing signs of fatigue, they can finally say, checkmate. So in this video, we will analyze just how badly the US depleted its high-tech arsenal against Iran, and what it means for the course of the war. Welcome to HistoryLegends. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like, hype, and subscribe. Now the ammo shortage crisis is only the tip of the iceberg. Many critical minerals required to replace the expanded munitions are just not available anymore. China controls 98% of global gallium production, 90% of neodymium processing, and 99% of dysprosium. These rare earths and specialty metals are inside every seeker head, guidance system, and radar module in the coalition's inventory. Same thing for tungsten, which is a vital component of projectiles used by gun systems like the CRAM. But there's one mineral that the US plans to double down on: copper. It's a critical component found in most American weapon systems we'll mention today. President Trump announced electricity demand needs to triple at the very least by 2030. To meet the AI buildup. Billionaire Robert Friedland said the world is sleepwalking into a copper crisis, and that if somebody's pointing a gun at you, you need that copper to shoot back.
To maintain global 3% GDP growth, we have to mine the same amount of copper in the next 18 years as we mined in the last 10,000 years. In the next 18 years, I've got to mine the same amount of copper as we mined in the last 10,000 years without electrification, without data centers, without solar and wind and the greening of the world economy. You people have no idea whatsoever what we're facing. You're dreaming.
Copper demand is beyond belief. Supply is vanishing. Copper shortage is just a matter of time now. President Trump has taken massive action to bring back copper production on US soil, including executive order and enacting 50% tariffs on imports.
Copper is a critical material, and the supply of copper is vital to our national security.
In fact, Stanley Druckenmiller, who many consider to be the all-time greatest macro investor, a self-made billionaire with a track record of never having a losing year, is very bullish on copper.
We own copper. It's not a genius trade, it's a big consensus trade. There's no supply coming on, a meaningful supply, very tight for the next 8 years. And obviously you have a big add-on from AI and data centers.
It's hard to believe copper won't be a huge beneficiary.
You have to be insane not to pay attention. JP Morgan, copper prices could soar further amid a tightening market. Look at the global production outlook, right when demand is projected to soar by 50% by 2040. The United States and China are battling over mineral supply chains and technological supremacy, because globalization stepped out of the equilibrium. And you can just see how when looking at the strategy both superpowers are taking. Bloomberg expects copper demand to reach 40 million tons by 2040. Energy transition, data centers, chips, and robots will be the main drivers of demand. Today I want to showcase a company that is trading near its all-time lows right now, down nearly 62% in the past 45 days. The owner of the Majuba Hill Copper Project and past producing mine in the state of Nevada. The sponsor of today's video, Giant Mining Corp. Ticker symbol BFGFF. This company is the only copper company I'm very optimistic about right now. I say again, Giant Mining has rarely, if ever, traded this cheap. I'm showcasing it to you at one of the lowest market caps in its history. It began in 2026 with a breakout over record-setting copper prices. It's currently trading at around $0.11. Giant Mining, US ticker BFGFF. This ticker symbol is available on Interactive Brokers and Charles Schwab, among others. Since President Trump's inauguration, his administration has aggressively pursued policies to secure US mineral independence. With copper emerging as a flashpoint, what we have been seeing is the very first chance, in my view, to be part of the rebirth of the American copper mining business. We can access it at its founding moment. As far as I can tell, Giant Mining, ticker BFGFF, owns a past producing copper mine in Nevada, one of America's best and most cherished mining jurisdictions. Giant Mining, ticker BFGFF, in my personal view, is my #1 copper idea. Howard Lutnick, that you can see here, said, American industries depend on copper and it should be made in America. No exemptions, no exceptions. Historic underground mines at the Majuba Hill Project produced copper, tin, and silver from the early 1900s to the 1950s, including 2.8 million pounds of copper, 184,000 ounces of silver, and 5,800 ounces of gold. The infrastructure is ready. Access roads, power supply, transportation, water supply, ore stockpile. Do your homework on Giant Mining, ticker BFGFF. Contrary to the US, Iran learned a lot from its setback during the 12-day war of June 2025. They realized the US faced a logistics problem, and that they could not drag out a high-intensity war beyond the shock and awe of the first days. That's why Iranian military thinkers planned a sophisticated, asymmetric attrition campaign designed to exhaust Western air defense capabilities while preserving their own strategic depth. An important factor is that accuracy is not as much of a critical factor in missile defense economics. That's a great advantage for the attacker. Meanwhile, the defender needs to ensure that every incoming missile is intercepted rapidly, and this eats up a lot of ammunition. As you can see on this graph, after an initial burst, the Iranians paced themselves. By conducting layered, sustained salvo attacks combining cheap drone swarms and low-cost missiles as an expendable vanguard, Tehran forced a punishing cost exchange ratio where million-dollar interceptors were traded for platforms costing a fraction of that. This saturation tactic led to a catastrophic logistical bottleneck for some of the main strike capabilities in the US arsenal. And we're only a month into the war! Here's a nice diagram of the various air defense systems used by the US and Israel. The ones running critically low at the moment are the Patriot system, THAAD, SM-2, SM-3, SM-6, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, and David Sling. That's when you might be wondering, how could this be happening? Well, we have no choice to go through every of these weapon systems. We can observe this ammo shortage crisis firsthand with Patriot interceptors. On the 17th of March, the Time reported, in the first few days of the Iran war, Middle Eastern countries burned through more than 800 Patriot missiles. In comparison, Ukraine received around 1,000 Patriot missiles since the start of its war against Russia. Now the problem is that Lockheed Martin, the American defense manufacturer making these Patriot missiles, only produced 620 PAC-3 MSE interceptors in 2025. A year's worth of production just gone like that within 2-3 days. It's as crazy as you taking your yearly salary and just spending it all in one weekend. Anyway, now the Gulf countries are obviously running dry in interceptors, mostly because they're total noobs. Can you imagine if they fired Patriot missiles on full auto mode at decoys? Yeah, well, that's exactly what they did. I'm not kidding. You see, in the first 48 hours, Iran fired over 1,200 projectiles at these 5 Arab countries, but 70% of them were drones. These saturation attacks aimed to overwhelm enemy air defenses and drain their interceptors. And it worked! According to the Foreign Policy Research Institute, Gulf partners fired nearly double the number of Patriot interceptors as US forces. Is it because they had to deal with more targets? Or is there another explanation, such as the complete lack of training and trigger control? I'll let you think about it for a second. Well, according to the Time, the Gulf troops left their batteries to take cover and the Patriots fire in automatic mode. In comparison, the Ukrainian crews of Patriot missile launchers stay at the controls and fire manually. A Ukrainian officer was astonished to hear reports of Gulf states firing as many as 8 Patriot interceptor missiles, each worth more than $3 million, at a single target, even using the expensive systems to hit cheap drones.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this is extremely interesting. You can provide the same weapon system to 2 different countries, and the result will be vastly different. According to the Payne Institute, in the first 96 hours, the Gulf partners fired 618 of their 4,000 Patriot PAC-3 interceptors, or 15% of their total inventory. To no surprise, the US is now stonewalling requests by Gulf states to replenish interceptors, because they know they'll just burn through the ammo within a couple days. And also because, let's say, another Middle Eastern state gets priority. By day 16 of the war, this figure increased to an estimated 1,285, or a third of all their Patriot missiles. In the end, we can believe that after a month of war against Iran, only about half of their inventory remains. At this rate, in a month from now, between the end of April and early May, the Gulf countries will have officially run out of Patriot interceptors. According to the CSIS, the US Patriot inventory was about 2,000 units, of which 1,600 were the most modern PAC-3 MSE variant. However, 2 weeks into the war, US Patriot batteries fired approximately 400 interceptors, 20% of the country's arsenal. At the current rate, the United States still have 4 months until 50% of its stock is depleted. Meanwhile, after a month of war, Saudi Arabia only expended about 8% of its Patriot interceptors. So I think it's realistic to think that they could sell some of their extra stockpiles to the UAE, for example. But of course, at a premium. At this point, the entire coalition still has about 6,000 Patriot interceptors, down 30% since the start of the war. They will have to make it stretch because that's all they'll have access to this year. It's like when you're squeezing the last bits of toothpaste until your next pay. The only problem is that you don't know when you're actually gonna get paid. And now to add more fuel to this huge ammo shortage crisis, Ukraine is still asking for more Patriot missiles as well. From a geopolitical standpoint, the US is getting humiliated. And you know it's bad when it's Ukraine, a country already at war, that agrees to help the Gulf countries. Officially, Ukraine deployed 200 experts to reduce wasteful use of expensive air defense systems like Patriots. In other words, Ihor and Volodymyr are going to operate Patriot launchers, while Mohammed is going to the back seat. But that's not all. On the 26th of March, Swiss media SRF reported an insane scandal. USA circumvents Swiss payment freeze for Patriot air defense system. Essentially what happened is that, as a leverage, Switzerland stopped payments for the Patriot air defense system in fall because delivery has been delayed for years. So in response, the US just accelerated the production rate to fulfill the contract. No. The US just seized the funds Switzerland paid for the F-35s, which they probably won't get either. Oh look, a super stealthy Swiss F-35. That's right, they got scammed. The gangs of New York strike again. The story of the Patriot missiles is a complete clusterfuck. And that's why you should always diversify your portfolio. So to fill in the gaps caused by the lack of available Patriot missiles, the UAE ordered Cheonggung 2 surface-to-air missiles from South Korea. That's because in January 2022, the UAE signed a $3.5 billion deal with South Korea for 10-fold Cheonggung 2 batteries. But as of 2026, only 2 batteries were operational. The South Korean launchers fired 60 interceptors during the recent Iranian missile and drone attacks, allegedly achieving a high success rate, and this depleted some of their initial loads. That's why on the 9th of March, a UAE Air Force C-17A Globemaster III airlifted 30 interceptors from Daegu Air Base in South Korea to Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates. The main reason behind this purchase is cost effectiveness. Cheonggung 2 interceptors are reported to cost roughly 1/3 to 1/4 the price of Patriot PAC-3 missiles, while offering comparable if not superior performance in the medium-range tier. But once again, with all these high-tech weapons, inventory is very limited. Beyond Patriot missile batteries, the air defense architecture is further reinforced by the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, providing exoatmospheric interception capabilities against high-altitude ballistic threats. 4 days into the war, partner nation THAAD interceptors were depleted by over a third. 16 days in, the Gulf countries expanded a total of 120 talons, which is another terminology for THAAD interceptors. And by now, we can believe they burned through 80% of their inventory, with only an estimated 34 units remaining.
Fuck.
Iran is laughing. One big missile barrage and it's over. Now the problem for the Gulf countries is that THAAD interceptors are also used by Israel, whose batteries fired 22 missiles, meaning they depleted 46% of the Israeli inventory by day 16. And you can imagine the situation now. The US military deployed in the region is not in a better shape. Last June, CSIS estimated 534 THAAD interceptors in stock prior to the 12-day war, during which more than 150 were used. So realistically, we could stand at about 380 units available before Operation Epic Fury. Now by day 16, analysts believe the US fired 198 talons, thus depleting the US arsenal by up to 50%. After a month of war, we could be standing at a 70% depletion rate, with only an estimated 114 THAAD interceptors left, and in the best case scenario, 230. Considering you need 48 interceptors to reload the battery, is not looking good. The disaster is exacerbated by the fact that Lockheed Martin's output is estimated at only 96 units per year.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
That's approximately what the US fired in the first 4 days of the war. 1 year of extremely expensive ammo just gone like that. This is not sustainable. And this makes me reflect really hard on the US doctrine regarding its air defense. But in this case, ammunition is not even the only concern. Iranian forces skillfully managed to destroy one ANTPY-2 battery radar in Jordan, which is the core sensor of a THAAD battery, and severely damaged 3 others, one near Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and 2 in the UAE. With only 8 THAAD batteries worldwide, losing radar coverage on 4 of them significantly strains the US layered missile defense network across the entire region. As you can imagine, such radars are not repaired overnight, and building new ones will take years. That's why on the 12th of March, footage shows all 6 THAAD launchers being removed from the US base in Seongju, South Korea, being redeployed to the Middle East. The South Korean government was against it, but let's just say they didn't have much say. This is exactly where South Korea was sitting that night. US warships are also in deep trouble. The US Navy's Aegis combat system uses 3 main missiles: RIM-66 Standard Missile 2 to shoot down aircraft and cruise missiles, RIM-161 Standard Missile 3 to hit ballistic missiles high up in space, and the multi-role RIM-164 Standard Missile 6, which is used against cruise missiles and drones, as well as against ballistic missiles in their terminal phase. Like American seamen say, nothing beats a good rim job at Mach 3, am I right? Lol. Yeah, let's just say American sailors are also trigger happy. One Ukrainian officer told The Time, For example, they used SM-6 missiles from a ship, a very good anti-missile missile. This SM-6 cost about $6 million, and they used it to shoot down a $70,000 Shaheed. That's literally the definition of overkill. So the Americans are laughing at Gulf countries, but look, they're doing the same thing. That's when we learned that the US Navy fired 310 missiles by day 4 in the war against Iran. 16 days in, 431 were expanded, meaning that by now, a month after the start of Operation Epic Fury, US warships depleted just over 20% of the total inventory. Now, at this rate, the US Navy can stretch its stockpiles until October 2026. But you know what? It wouldn't be a problem if the US had infinite amount of ammunition. Once again, the problem is that Raytheon currently only produces 125 SM-6s per year.
And it's gone.
On the first days of fighting. From a historical perspective, it's extremely interesting because the same thing happened during World War I. None of the European armies expected the war to last years. So within weeks, all armies had to ration their artillery shells. The Gulf countries are running out of air defense interceptors. Same thing for US forces deployed in the Middle East. And to make matters even worse, Iran's missile campaign also depleted a large number of Israel's interceptors. While Iron Dome stocks remain operationally viable, the same cannot be said for the David Sling and Arrow systems. Stockpiles of the respective interceptors are now running critically low. According to the FPRI, on the 28th of February, Israel had 250 David Sling Stunner missiles in reserve. However, by day 16, the Payne Institute reported 135 Stunners to have been launched, or 54% of the total. The situation is even worse for the Arrow system. 96 hours in, Israeli forces burned through 80 of its stock of 150 Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 anti-ballistic missiles. I mean, look at this. 6 Arrow 3 interceptors got dribbled by 1 Iranian missile. By day 16, Payne Institute reported that Israel fired 122 Arrow interceptors, thus expanding over 80% of its pre-operation inventory. You can imagine the situation now after 4 weeks of fighting. Yet apparently the IDF says it's not facing any shortage of interceptors.
Right.
The Corp is too real. They smacked the bee's nest and now they're wondering why they keep getting stung. Israeli defense experts stated that Israel needs significantly more Arrow 3 interceptors. And even if production is ramped up now, what you are firing today is what was ordered 2 or 3 years ago. With Iron Dome and Arrow systems running critically low on ammunition, air defense units must prioritize engagements and selectively target only the highest threat inbound missiles. Like here on the 21st of March, as an Iranian missile plunged down on Dimona without any Israeli interceptors to challenge it. Ultimately, this means US air defense capabilities are being overstretched. They will have to find a way to scramble stuff left and right to keep protecting their Israeli ally at all costs. As you can see, the US is facing a costly attrition dynamic in defense, where cheap Iranian missiles and long-range drones are bringing Western interceptors to critical depletion. It's clear that US and Israeli leaders did not expect Iran to sustain the battle for so long. And now they're trapped in a flight forward type of situation. Well, it turns out now they have the same problem for offensive weapons. Because the United States is also confronting a growing strategic dilemma concerning the availability of its offensive weapons and strike capabilities. First, there's the disaster situation with the Gerald R. Ford. We're talking about plumbing issues followed by internal fires. Instead of participating in Operation Epic Fury, the aircraft carrier is now arriving in Croatia for repairs that could take weeks to months. But that's not the only problem the US Navy has to deal with. For example, before Operation Epic Fury, the total number of Tomahawk cruise missiles was estimated at 3,200 units, including those aboard destroyers and submarines. By day 16, 535 Tomahawks had been fired, or 17% of the inventory. The Financial Times reported it's a massive expenditure of Tomahawks. The Navy will be feeling this expenditure for several years. Did you hear that? Years! You know what? China is laughing. That's when on the 27th of March, The Independent declared, the US has fired 850 Tomahawk missiles into Iran. That means 1 month into the war, the US Navy burned through 25% of the country's Tomahawk stockpiles. Just like with air defense interceptors, the dilemma is that the US Navy only acquired a very little number of new cruise missiles. Pentagon documents show the Navy bought 68 Tomahawks in fiscal year 2023, 34 in 2024, 22 through 2025, and plans for 57 in 2026. Now check this, in 4 years, the US Navy acquired 181 Tomahawk cruise missiles. And at the same time, by day 4 of the war against Iran, they had already expanded 375 units. As you can understand, this would take several years to replenish.
Madness.
Now let's move on to the US Air Force. B-52 bombers have been executing strike sorties almost exclusively armed with AGM-158 JASSMs, a munition that stands for Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile. These precision-guided munitions exceed 1,000 kilometers in range and serve as the primary subsonic air-launched cruise missile within the US arsenal. Now it's estimated that before Operation Epic Fury, the US military had 3,500 JASSMs in stock, a relatively large inventory, mostly thanks to sizable Air Force purchases in the last decade. Thing is, even these munitions got used up pretty fast. You see, the B-52 can carry 20 JASSMs at a time, the B-1 24, and the B-2 can be armed with 16 JASSMs. This means by day 16, in only 2 weeks of operations, 912 AGM-152 JASSMs were reportedly dropped on Iran, or 26% of the US inventory. And a month into the war, we could be looking at a 45 depletion rate. As for US ground forces, they're going through a critical ammunition shortage in regards to HIMARS, particularly with respect to the MGM-140 ATACMS tactical ballistic missiles it employs. If after 94 hours only 135 ATACMS were launched, by day 16, 912 of the 3,500 ATACMS were burned through, or about 25% of the inventory. Other sources like FPRI reported that within the same time frame, US stockpiles of ground-launched ATACMS and the new PRSM ballistic missiles were depleted by a third. Notice how ATACMS missiles were used to compensate for the decrease of US airstrikes against Iran. But no matter what they do, logistics doesn't lie. At this rate, the US will run out of ATACMS missiles by mid-May. The worst is that ATACMS production ended in 2007, while the ATACMS successor, the PRSM, is only being produced at a rate of 60 units per fiscal year. Within 2 weeks of war, US forces expanded 15 years worth of ammunition. Yeah, this is not gonna work. In conclusion, the US blitzkrieg failed. US military planners expected a short and decisive aerial campaign, using their technological superiority, but it failed. Inventory for dozens of missile systems have been depleted, and now the US is stuck. Iran can produce over 100 offensive missiles per month, and it has an inventory of tens of thousands of long-distance drones. And that's without taking into account possible Russian help. That production rate surpasses the manufacturing output of the dozen critical weapon systems in the US arsenal that are currently being depleted by the ongoing conflict. Even worse, the draining of critical systems and high-end munitions is particularly affecting US positioning in the Indo-Pacific region. The tragedy is that towards the end of Operation Prosperity Guardian against the Houthis in Yemen around April 2025, the acting chief of naval operations, Admiral James Kilby, already warned that the munitions industrial base must be revamped to upkeep the US magazine depth for a future protracted conflict. And as always, nothing was done, and now it could be too late. Like Brendan Weichart wrote on 1945, given this tragic reality, Iran can produce missiles at a greater rate than the Americans and their allies can build interceptors to stop them. He added, in short, the Iran war is exposing a brutal truth that Washington has spent decades avoiding, that America's military is optimized for short bursts of overwhelming force, rather than sustained industrial warfare against a determined, well-prepared adversary. This means the US will either have to stop this war now and take the L, or double down. We know Trump! We know Trump! On the 25th of March, Reuters wrote, Pentagon says it will ramp up war supplies with defense companies. Yet 3 weeks ago, on March 6, Breaking Defense also reported defense companies to quadruple production of exquisite weapons, where Trump met with 7 execs of 7 defense contractors, and they have agreed to quadruple production of the exquisite class weaponry, in that we want to reach as rapidly as possible the highest levels of quantity. The problem is that the US needs the ammo right now, not in a year. And hold on, the strange part is that expansion began 3 months prior to the meeting. So if I understand properly, the President of the United States is now publicly admitting that 3 months ago, he made a secret deal with America's defense contractors to quadruple weapons production before we even knew there was going to be a war with Iran. Anyway, it must be a strange coincidence, right? As of now, this means the US military will have to adapt and compensate by using low-cost systems, such as the Sting interceptor drone developed by Ukraine. Same idea in terms of strike capabilities. Just like Russia, the US might need to find ways to leverage vast existing stockpiles of cheap munitions, like GBU-31 JASSM and GBU-39 small diameter bombs, and find a way for them to replace ballistic and cruise missiles. One thing is for sure, it's easy to start a war, but nobody knows how and when it will end. That's all I have for you today. See you in the next one.